Okay, in today's exciting adventure, we're going to be looking at the where clause. We've been talking in earlier videos about using the AND operator, also the OR operator, and how they're different. But now we're going to be adding another level of granularity to that, which is using parentheses. So when we have sort of a whole bunch of stuff in our where clause, we can nest things with the parentheses and sort of change the outcome. But before we get started, I just wanted to show you something we'll be using. The getDate function does exactly what it looks like. It gets the date, the current date time from the machine, the server, the machine that SQL Server is running on. So today happens to be April 25th, 2014. What I want to do in subsequent pages is I want to run this thing called datepart, and all datepart is a handy way in SQL Server for you to supply a date, in this case the current date, and you can tell it, you know, I either want the year, or I want the month, or I want the date, hour, minute, second, milliseconds, whatever you want, and it returns an integer. So in order for me to return a 4-digit year, the way that you do that is you go datepart, and then inside the parens, the first parameter you pass into datepart for a 4-digit year is YY. That's the part. That stands for 4-digit year. And then getDate is just the date. So when I run this, all it's going to do is say 2014, and that's all I want it to do. Because when you're using this, you may have a date range where you want to take everybody that something happened to them in 2014, but you don't want to have to do a between, where it's between January 1st, 2014 at midnight all the way to December 31st, 2014 at 11:59:59 and 999 milliseconds. That's crazy. So you just want to extract the date. Very good. Let's close that. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is select from my employees table. And as you can see here, there's a couple of things that we'll be looking at. See this DP key? That stands for department. And just to make a long story short, the sales guys are always in department 3 or DP key 3. And of course they sound like salesmen. Tony Macaroni, you know you're in sales if that's your name. What a great name. Kenny Sellum, guy was born to be a salesman. Now the people with 4s, anybody with a 4 over here, these are all the developers and the IT guys. They're the really cool guys. Highly compensated. Not like the sales guys, but sales guys actually work. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing here is just run a few really simple queries. I want to pick all the employees where the DP key is equal to 4. Okay, great. Got all the IT guys. Lovely. I want to run another query where it's just all the sales guys, and there's 2 of them. They make more than any other department. Here's me just running another query where I'm going to take everybody that was hired in 2009 or earlier. Boom, here we go. We have people that were hired in 2009, 2008, 2007, but nobody from like 2012 or anything like that. Okay. All these things separately don't really do anything for me, but what I want to do, here's what the, you know, the powers that be told us to figure out. They want to give bonuses in the company based on how long people have been with the company over a certain amount of time, and then what departments they were in. And we'll say that, as usual, the sales department and the IT department were profitable. Everybody else, it was a horror story. But they also only want to do that for people that have been with a company, we'll say 4 or 5 years. So what we want to do, you know, now the requirement from the boss is that they have to be either in the IT department, or the sales department, and they have to have been hired before 2009. So this should work, right? We're going to be saying where the department key is 4 or the department key is 3, and the date part is 2009 or less of the hire date. So let's let that rip and see what happens. Okay, well, let's take a look. Everybody's in department 4 or 3, so that's great. That's great. And, oh, wait a minute. Wait a second. We've got a couple of people here, though, that are in 2012 and 2011. How can that be? We're telling it that the date part has to be less than or equal to 2009. Is SQL Server broken? No. Let's look at this a different way. Here, again, we have select from the employees, order by DP. Okay, this is just if we need it. Basically, take a look at this. This is what we ran on the other screen. Now it's returning a couple of records that we don't want. But that's because when it comes to this where clause, the where clause, you might remember in math, pretty please my dear Aunt Sally, parentheses, power, parentheses, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, right? It'll do multiplication before it does subtraction, that kind of fun stuff. Well, here, unless you have parentheses kind of collecting things ahead of time, it just reads it left to right. So it'll say where the DP key is equal to 4, which we have. Here's a guy that is in that department, but he's too new. But he is in 4, or DP key equals 3, and this is true. See, what we really want to do is we want to apply this date, not just to the DP key 3, but also the DP key 4. But because this line is really interpreted, it's going to say, it thinks you're saying because the DP key equals 4, or it's 3 and it's 2009 or less. Do you see the difference? If I run this now, like this, if you notice I get the same thing. By me not putting, and by the way, this is a very simple where clause, but by me not putting any parentheses around here, there's a parentheses in, the function, but that's a different story. But do you see how I added parentheses here where I'm grouping together these two things? Whoops. In this line, I had put parentheses around here, so it's grouping these two things together, but guess what? SQL Server does that anyway because it's interpreting it. It reads it left to right. In order to fix this, what we really need to do is wrap this part in parentheses. So what we're saying is the DP key has to equal 4, or the DP key has to equal 3. But we're putting this in parentheses, so it figures out this whole thing first. It's kind of like saying we're DP key in 3, 4. So now, by putting these together and consolidating them, then now this AND, instead of just applying to this, it applies to this. So the AND applies to 4s and 3s. So if we run this way, you see now it shows everything we want. They're either in department 3 or 4, and they've been around for a while. Now, this is extremely important, and the reason for that is this. First of all, let's take a look at what this looks like when we expand it out for a minute. Here, what I did, I'm just basically taking these 3 lines, and I'm rewriting it like this because this is much easier to read. Let's run this. All right. So basically, it's giving us the 2 records that we don't want, the 2011 and 2012. But now you can see here, basically this is arbitrarily doing the same thing as this here, because I put the parentheses in a place where they're not really going to do anything for us. See, because it's already consolidating these 2, and then the OR separates out the 4. Here, we'll get the same results when we do this. It's basically saying DP key equals 4, or, and then this whole mess. It's 3 and it has the right date. So we're still going to get 5 records here. But you might get a better idea of, by indenting this, why this is so much better. What we're saying here, and let me just kind of pop a few more spaces in here. This is saying where the key is 3 or 4, but see, this is in parentheses, so it looks at this whole thing as one chunk. All of this and this. So it's kind of like the distributive property in math a little bit. What this is really saying is department key 3 and the certain date, also department key 4 and the same date. Whereas these 2 guys are saying department key 3 and the date, or just 4 and we don't care about the date. So by wrapping these 2 things in parentheses, what we're really saying is, even though there's an OR, the OR doesn't split anything up. This whole thing is read as one specific thing. We could have also, if we were smart, we could have written this like this. But then we wouldn't have really been able to demonstrate this. See, if we do this, that's a little easier on the eyes. But you see, that's sort of the same idea as doing this. It's just sometimes you can't use an in statement because this could have been like a lot more logic in here. But basically, the parentheses force you to consider everything here first and then apply it to the rest of what comes up. But last but not least, why is this such a big deal? Well, what I did here is I just ran one last query. I'm just adding up all the money together. Let's say that these people were supposed to go on a vacation or maybe get a bonus, and you're going to give each of them 10% of their annual salary. Well, here's the way you're not supposed to run it. And that's 1.1 million. Here's the way we're supposed to run it with the parentheses where they need to be. And you notice the number's a lot different. The number is 914,000. That's over a $200,000 difference just because two parentheses were missing. And if you had to pay 10% of that $200,000 plus difference, which is over $20,000, let's say, out of your pocket, that's a really expensive mistake for a couple of parentheses. So you have to, when you're using parentheses, you have to really pay attention about what you're doing. You have to think about what you're doing, and you have to really make sure that you understand the requirements. And if you don't, ask, you know,